Good morning, afternoon, or night to everyone. My name is Itelit Sompa. I am a research manager at the Clean Air Task Force, and it is a pleasure to be here among an outstanding group of speakers. On behalf of the Clean Air Institute, the Clean Air Task Force, and HEAL, I'm honored to welcome you to this much-needed session on how countries can integrate superpollutants into their nationally determined contributions, and specifically, what are the strategies that can be used to address tropospheric ozone and its precursors? This year, the UNFCCC has extended the submission deadline of NDCs to about a month before COP30. Therefore, countries now have an opportunity to further reflect on their commitments and demonstrate increased ambition to curb climate change and avoid climate tipping points. Now, tropospheric ozone is a critical yet often overlooked climate forcer, and we believe that integrating tropospheric ozone and its precursors into NDCs will help countries in demonstrating increasing ambition by emphasizing the abating potential they have and how the critical role in accelerating climate mitigation while also improving air quality and public health. Furthermore, highlighting such benefits will foster a more holistic and impactful approach to global climate action. So today's goal for this seminar is to improve strategies to integrate short-lived climate forcers, which include tropospheric ozone and its precursors, into NDCs, and thereby increase the climate ambition. You will hear from experts from Mexico, Kenya, and Colombia how their countries have already integrated short-lived climate forcers into their NDCs. And also, we will hear from representatives from the Clean Air Fund and the Clean Air Coalition. What are the guidelines, the challenges, and the recommendations to integrate them? Finally, we will provide a roadmap on how to integrate the short-lived climate forcers into the NDCs. We hope that you leave today with ideas on how to enhance synergies between climate action and air pollution control, leading to more comprehensive and effective policies in your countries. And before we get started, I would like to give you some housekeeping information. First, if you want to make any questions or comments during the session, please use the chat function on your Zoom app. And also, we will open the floor at the end of the first set of the presentations so that all participants can share experiences from their countries. Second, we will have a complete session of Q&A and discussions that will go at the end of today's webinar, where we will respond to some of the questions from the chat, and we will also encourage participants to share their thoughts by raising their hand, and then we will open the microphones. Lastly, we invite you to explore our virtual pavilion on tropospheric ozone, where you will find more information and can access related resources by typing pavilion.cleanairfund.org. So now it's time for our presentations to kick off, and we will start with Dr. Abraham Ortínez, who works for the Mexican National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change and focuses on short-lived climate pollutants. Dr. Ortínez has extensive research on emissions, mitigation strategies, and environmental policies. Please, Dr. Ortínez, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much for the invitation. Could you share my presentation, please? You can do it.
Of course. Let me share.
Thank you very much. Well, I will try to just be very briefly in terms of what is the Mexico progress on black carbon and the NDC targets. Specifically, where Mexico has been working with shortly climate pollutants since 15 years ago, or probably more. And we have been developed many activities regarding to black carbon specifically, and of course the other surely climate pollutants. I will focus my presentation on black carbon and some of the other activities that we had developed currently in Mexico. Please, the next one. Well, we have Mexico is committed to mitigate the greenhouse gases emissions, first of all, by 22%, and the black carbon in 51% to 2030 compared with the baseline. Currently, we update our target now with 30% more and other 5% regarding to energy, clean energy. So we have a new target from 22% to 35%. The NDC of Mexico include the greenhouse gases, of course, and we are one of the first countries that we have the commitment to mitigate the black carbon emission reductions. And we are one of the countries that will start with these actions because we believe that the benefits and the co-benefits in terms of other health issues and benefits on air pollution, it's very important from the target in terms of the commitment of greenhouse gases. Next one, please. So this can explain what is the connection to the air pollution and climate change synergies. We have, in one side, the greenhouse gases, and in the other side, some of the pollutants. So, and Mexico has been developed a lot of efforts in terms of air pollution, and we are working currently in the connection, and the connection are the surely climate pollutants, because one of them is the global scale impacts for the greenhouse gases, and the other is the local scale impacts in terms of air pollution. So the connection in ozone and specifically particle matter, where there is the black carbon and the organic carbon is part of the surely climate pollutants. So one of the things that is relevant is the mostly of them is coming from the combustion sources, and mostly of them generate greenhouse gases, but as well air pollutants. So the targets specifically for those specific pollutants, black carbon and ozone, for example, because it's not directly emitted, but is created by other pollutants, is mostly coming from the main sources. So if we have actions specifically in the greenhouse gases commitments, and we can include the other pollutants in terms of mitigation, we can really have a lot of benefits. And I will show in a graphic later how is the benefits of these actions. Please, the network. Next slide, please. Where black carbon in economic sectors with the SDG and synergy with adaptation. As well, we are connected the synergies between adaptation and mitigation, because it's important that we can include that in terms of climate change and improve the air quality. Of course, to improve specifically the public health, food security, and the environmental services of ecosystems under the influence of urban plumes. So in these tables, we can look how is our activity economics. We have sectors like transport, power generation, residential and commercial combustion, specifically oil and gas, industry, agriculture, and waste, and land use, where is the black carbon is part of that. So we are really connected, the synergies, how the actions can reduce the effects of the emissions, and how is the benefit of that one in the adaptation, and of course in the health benefits. We estimate as well the benefits in SDGs, part of the actions that Mexico has a lot of commitments as well. The other one, please. Well, one of the things that we has been working is validate the measurements in terms of how we can really verify the mitigation actions, because we can estimate our reductions in terms of the emission inventories. But one of the things that we want to do as well is put the emissions monitorings. And in that case, we have concentrations, how the concentrations can decrease on the time. The emissions is very important because it's part of the precursors in process and fuel dependent. It's important, I mentioned, coming from the main sources of combustion. In the case of ozone, it's not linear secondary, I mentioned, pollutant, and it's strong surely climate pollutants in the cities specifically. So Mexico, currently, we have a commitment for our president in terms of mitigate the pollution, the air pollution in some of the main cities, Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. So the actions are very important that the surely climate pollutants are part of these new actions and these new policies from these new administrations. We are monitoring and to validate, and we need the long-term observations because it's not good just have a one observation for some months. We need a really long trends to have this or to take a look how it decrease in the time, how the actions and the policies can verify that this is really working in the cities specifically. So we are working with the local air monitoring stations and with satellite observations. One of the things that we are currently doing with Mexico, Canada, and United States is working in the communities, specifically for the residential combustion, where one of the things is biomass burning is important in terms of emissions of black carbon. Please, the next one. As I mentioned, we want to see this kind of measurements. If you can take a look, this is an ozone concentrations in Mexico City, and has been monitoring for around 25, 30 years. So the ozone and the policy actions can take a look how decrease the tendency in the time. The trend is going down, but this takes some time, some years, not just one month or one year. It takes like 25 years or 20 years take to look how this tendency is going down. So the black carbon, we want to take the measurements as well and take a look how decrease on the time the black carbon and other pollutants as well. But this is the way that we can monitor in the effectiveness of the policy actions. Next one, please. So we are doing a lot of efforts. We have not too much monitoring stations in Mexico. We have a lack of measurements in Mexico. We are doing efforts from INEC and other institutions, local principal cities like Mexico City, Monterrey in some cases, and Guadalajara has been working with monitoring stations with black carbon. But we need to increase that monitoring because we need to have more information about what happens in the cities specifically. In the other side, I mentioned we are doing the same in the rural areas. We are working with some of the local cities and municipalities to put these monitoring stations to evaluate how new technologies can be changed the concentrations in terms of benefits over quality, indoor quality as well, and the benefits on health. Please, the next one. One of the things that Mexico developed was the strategy. A strategy is supported by the Clean Air Coalition, and we work with the Mexico authorities to develop this strategy. As I mentioned, this is a graph that we can see what is the benefits to mitigate not only the greenhouse gases. If we mitigate complete mitigation that include greenhouse gases, methane, and surely climate pollutants, we have the trajectory that we can get the target under 1.5 degrees. But this is a lot of efforts. We need to do a lot of efforts, and we need to combine the strategies in terms of climate change and air quality. In other ways, we are really just wait until probably more time to decrease the concentration of greenhouse gases and the surely climate pollutants. I will show you what is the content of this document. Unfortunately, we have only this document on Spanish, but can be consulted if you want to have some translations in your computers to take a look what is the content of these chapters in this strategy. Next one, please. Well, what is the content of the in the chapters of these strategies? We have, of course, the emissions of black carbon. We have several of the sectors where include brick kilns. We have the transport sector, for example, in terms of black carbon. As well, we have emissions of methane, many of the sources, and as well we have the precursors of ozone. So this document can be base of many of the actions that Mexico can do it in the next year. So that's important how we can be related to in combined with the strategies of climate change and air quality, and is the base of many of the actions that we are currently working. Next one, please. As well, we have the connections with the SGD I mentioned and the surely climate. What is the benefits of many of the actions and the benefits in terms of the SGDs? And of course, we have a chapter with science. It's important that the countries and specifically the cities can invite to local scientists in terms that they can help to understand what is the complexity of these pollutants, specifically for black carbon, and of course how they can help to do some research and get numbers and get information to the policy actions specifically. So one of the things that we are doing is support the research in Mexico in terms of black carbon and other surely climate pollutants. And as well, it's very important, the communication strategies. So all of this information you can find in this document, and it's it's linked in the CCAC webpage. Everybody can download from that. Next one, please. Well, in summary, Mexico has taken concrete steps to enhance and expand our national climate policies and include air pollutants and surely climate pollutants like black carbon, ozone, and methane. Air quality and climate change actions are integrated in the federal environmental agency plans. We are working with different federal ministries where we can talk about what is the benefits of make some policies in terms of climate change and the benefits on air quality and the health. The Integrate National Strategy, that's this document I mentioned, is a document guide to enhance actions to improve air quality and mitigate the climate change with multiple benefits at national and subnational level. It's important to highlight, show the mitigation air quality climate change has a common origin, is the same combustion sources. Integrate the narratives on air quality and climate change is possible in most of the sectors, and a roadmap should be established to have integrate inventories. For example, it's important that many people and many, of course, subnational and national level develop air quality emission inventories, and the other side, the greenhouse gas emission inventories. We understand clearly that have different approaches, but now in terms of IPCC, it's working how we can integrate the same inventories in one specifically. In other words, we can subestimate and overestimate the emission of many of the sources, and the policy actions can be not very effective. So that's the way that we can think in the future, that is not underestimate or overestimate. The air quality and climate change programs must maintain the same mitigation objectives, seeking multiple benefits. For example, in the transport sector, we are going to electromobility is one of the best actions that we can do it, because the benefits are in terms of greenhouse gases and the benefits are in terms of mitigate the emission of the air pollutants. The territorial planning is very important. We are looking now in the cities how they are increasing and now have policy in terms of territorial planning. The cities are growing, but not in the best way. So that what means that probably more transport and not probably more clean transport. So one of the things is important to integrate, and of course, how we can improve in terms of climate change programs. And finally, the management of the cities must be integrated with cross-cutting aspects like health, gender, energy, economic, and territorial and reality-oriented communities. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abraham, for sharing all this detailed and very comprehensive experience of Mexico. Now we're going to hear from Faith Timba, who is the climate advisor for the Office of Kenya's Special Envoy for Climate. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours, Faith.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes, I work with the Special Climate Envoy's Office under the Office of the President as a carbon markets advisor. Apologies, I don't have any slides, but I'll just talk through what Kenya has been doing in terms of this topic. So in the context of the NDC, so that everybody is clear on where we are, we submitted our first NDC in 2016 and later on updated it in 2020. And with this revised NDC, the target was 32% of greenhouse gas emissions relative to business as usual of 143 million tons CO2. Again, there was conditions on this. We needed a lot of funding in order to realize this. And so we also recently submitted our BTR, which is the biennial transparency report under the UNFCCC in December 2024, which actually then is able to provide indications on where we are in terms of our targets, which I'll talk a bit more about. And we are currently developing the next NDC for 2030 to 2035 period. The current NDC, the one that runs between 2021 and 2030, our focus on mitigation, and it seems similar to Abraham's point in some regard. We definitely are looking, or we develop our NDC looking at what our vision as a country is. And that is provided in a Vision 2030, which talks about a low carbon, climate resilient economy. And so with this, the GHG inventory data, which was calculated, the climate action plan, as well as a national action plan to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, that was done in partnership with various partners, we were able to identify our focus areas for our mitigation activities. One major concern for Kenya was the potential use of energy, particularly from fossil fuels. Looking into 2013, a business as usual scenario, it would be likely then we'd be very dependent on that, and that would definitely impact the environment. Whereas on the other side, Kenya has abundant renewable energy resources, as well as the GHG inventories, which revealed that our top emitting sector was agriculture and LULUCF. However, energy was following very closely. So based on this information, several priority mitigation activities were put in place, and these have been the focus in this NDC period. The ones that relate to this particular topic, tropospheric ozone, would be one, increasing renewable energy in the national grid, hence shaving off reliability or dependence on fossil fuel. And this is a big thing for Kenya, particularly because we do have a big reserve of geothermal energy, and this is one of the things we want to capitalize on. In fact, very recently, the president launched Africa Green Initiative, which seeks to ensure that, as we build our renewable energy capacity, we also are able to power industries, not only in Kenya, but in the region, and hence reduce these pollutants and emissions. Then the other one is enhancing energy and resource efficiency across different sectors. The other pertinent sector for Kenya, and I believe most African countries, is the clean cooking sector. Very, very many people still rely on dirty fuels and inefficient cooking technologies that also contribute in terms of particulate matter and some of these pollutants into the air. So that's a very big one. And in fact, we have a clean cooking strategy, which runs until 2028, that highlights the priority areas for the country. Apart from that, there's also developing low carbon efficient transportation. a big emphasis also on agriculture, and this touches on methane, particularly livestock management and waste management. In the context of our NDC, particularly as an African country, poverty alleviation is a big thing, as well as working through activities that also will create job opportunities for our youthful population. I also want to stress that, for Kenya to achieve its NDC, there's also requirements for funding as well. This is one of the things that is very important for many developing countries. Even as we think about this topic, even where monitoring and monitoring of these emissions is concerned, there needs to be some type of financial support to ensure that we're actually able to achieve this. So where gases are concerned, the NDCs primarily will cover CO2, methane, and N2O. We do mention that we will capture HFCs and all these other gases, but at that point, they were considered negligible, but will be considered possibly in the next, and this is something that's still under discussion. The BTR, which was submitted in 2024, provided even more, you could say it allowed us to see where we were in terms of achieving our NDCs. The emissions definitely were slightly up, and the biggest sectors in terms of emissions were, or rather the biggest gases in terms of emissions were methane and CO2. N2O was very negligible. And the biggest sector again was energy and our follow sectors. And that, I believe, will definitely inform the next iteration of the NDC. I also want to highlight that the NDC also revealed that, there are still some financial gaps in terms of the expectation on the conditional side. And this is also why, Kenya and other African nations were very keen to in our input on the NCQG in the last COP. So what can I summarize, or in conclusion? These tropospheric pollutants they are included in Kenya's NDC, but related to activities that would contribute to that. We continue to monitor methane and N2O, as well as CO2, and we'll continue to see how we can be able to incorporate these other gases as methodologies are developed. I know the Ministry of Energy has been working very closely on the ozone-related project as well. So this is something that is still very important to the country. Yeah, and again, we have also put in place initiatives, especially in the Nairobi region. So that's the capital city of Kenya, for those who might not know, to improve reporting and to actually monitor air quality in Nairobi as, the biggest or the capital city where there's a lot of population. Clean cooking is also a big focus for our country, because it also has, contributes to these particulate matters. And also to emphasize that monitoring for us is one of the things that is very, very important, and where support is required, where we are able to actually track and monitor, then this is something that enables us to be able to continue doing that effectively. I believe the IPCC is developing a draft methodologies for this, and we would be, looking forward to interacting with this methodology to engage further on this. Thank you so much. I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you so much, Faith, for sharing these updates on Kenya's NDCs. And we will now hear from Carolina Garzón, who is a mitigation consultant supporting the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia in the process of formulation of the new NDC 3.0 and the definition of carbon budgets. Carolina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Abraham. Thank you, Faith, for your presentations. Today, I'm going to present some of the Colombian experience on the integration of shoreline climate pollutants into their NDC. Well, first, I want to share with you some of our like history in this matter. And first of all, I want to mention that with the help of the CCAC, we developed a national strategy for shoreline climate pollutant mitigation. This first strategy sets a implementation plan until 2022. And you can see that it was like a short time to implement. Fortunately for us, we present our new NDC in 2020, and this NDC include a specific black carbon target and specific mitigation measures for reduction of black carbon. And also before that, we have our first indicative black carbon inventory that right now is a process implemented by the IDEAM, that is the institution here in Colombia that is in charge of the inventory, the GHG inventory, but also has working through all these years to include black carbon and other pollutants into the inventory. So it's a periodical process to evaluate and estimate these emissions. In 2021, the second national black carbon inventory was released with the updated biennial updated report that was Colombian third BUR. And also in 2022, and in line with our actions into the NDC, new emission standard for land mobile sources was released. I want also to mention that our NDC is in our legal framework, and with this legal framework, that is the climate action law, we develop we propose to the developing of implementation and monitoring plans for every mitigation measure, of course, including those mitigation measures for black carbon. And with these implementation plans, different ministry tell us how they can implement the mitigation measures in terms of periodic timelines and what are the milestones for those implementations. And it has helped us to identify what are the barriers and what we need to do to take the next step into that implementation. In 2024, last year, we published the third national inventory for black carbon and criteria pollutants, but also we developed a preliminary potential analysis for potential impact of GHG, the potential impact of GHG mitigation measures on black carbon emissions. So later I'm going to share a little bit about that. This first step, the national strategy of mitigation for SLCPs, include a huge branch on information management. That's why we are still working and developing the black carbon inventory, and I think it's the most strength of this strategy. Also include a benefits approach. And this year, also with the support of the CCAC, we are working on that strategy on how we can analyze and include the co-benefits on the mitigation measure, not only for SLCP, but also for GHG. So it's a work in progress, and we hope that by the end of this year, we can show you our goals in this aspect. Also, it includes an institutional strengthening, but of course, it's not only part of this strategy, it's like a governmental strategy and an institutional strategy to make every institution thinking about SLCPs, including these impacts, and different teams has been working in this institutional strengthening. And of course, the establishment of a portfolio or the mitigation measure specific for reduction of black carbon. Well, this is the most recent data on black carbon emissions here in Colombia. As you can see, for 2021, that is the period of reporting that we presented last year, we have 29 kilotons of black carbon emissions, but most of them, nearly 85% of them, are related with other sectors in the resilient sectors, mainly related with firewood for cooking. And one of the mitigation actions, as you will see after, is related with those emissions, with the reduction of emission related with cooking, firewood for cooking. Also, we have most of the emissions on with the use of bagasse for some industrial processes, and of course the transport, and that's why it's important to have new standard emissions limits. In the NDC of Colombia, we include, of course, the black carbon emission reduction. That is a 14% reduction of black carbon compared to the 2014 emissions levels. Here you can see some of the mitigation measures, the replacement of vehicles with diesel engines, electric mobility, the replacement of traditional wood-burning cookers with efficient cookers. That's a process that has been a huge that will have a huge impact, not only for the mission, but also for the health of the people. Abraham was mentioned how it is important for Mexico to implement this, not only analyze, but also this transition for the people. Of course, there is a line of improvement of the brick industry and the reduction of agricultural burning. Last year, we have a mandatory only mainly for climate reasons to stop the agricultural burning that we think worked really well, but we still waiting for the results. The results. And in the right side of my slide, you can see a preliminary evaluation on how the mitigation measures impact on the reduction of black carbon emissions. You can see that there are some actions that go really down in this evaluation, and that can help not only the reductions of GHG, but also the reductions of black carbon. But also there are some points over the range of zero that are mitigation measures for GHG that increment the emissions of black carbon. So in these specific measures, we need to establish some specific actions to avoid the impact of those black carbon emissions. Our NDC also include actions on methane, and we don't have any specific mitigation measures for methane, but we do have a mitigation measures for all the greenhouse gases. Between the actions, you can see that we have the improve of manure management to implement different mitigation technologies to reduce the emission from rice. And related with the energy sector, we have implemented in the few last years the recovery and reuse of fugitive emission from oil and gas facilities, especially in the upstream chain. Also, we have for waste sector some actions related with the separation and treatment of biodegradable municipal waste, and of course the reuse or the use of biogas in the disposal sites. Faith was mentioned that there is a huge gap that we need to close. For Colombia, those gaps are in most of the lines that you can see: capability gaps, financing gaps, implementation gaps, and of course regulatory framework gaps. We are trying to work on those different aspects to have this balance between all those gaps and the ambition that Colombia had set for their NDC. We have strategies that we want to take or establish on those territories where the emissions are more prominent. For instance, you can see that in the right side of the slide, the zones in Colombia or the departments here in Colombia where are the most emissions. For instance, for enteric fermentation, you can see a dark blue zone. You can see a different zone for waste emission of methane, and a different and highlighted zone for the emission of rice. So we want to work on those specific zones to implement territorially or mitigation actions and to start reducing emissions. Finally, I want to share some of the steps that we are taking to prepare our NDC 3.0. We have different agendas. The first one is the territorial agenda. This government is listening and working closely with the territories. So we have an entire agenda with territories and with sectors that we have always been working since the first NDC. We are working on the implementation assessment, that is a evaluation of how we are going and if we are going well, or we need to make some better decisions and implementation strategies for our mitigation actions. This is also related not only with GHG, but also with black carbon. And we have an academic agenda mainly to include the GST measures, or to think how we can include the GST measures on our new NDC, and a strategy of formalization. Well, that's the general step. We are going with multiple steps of dialogue and defining roles and responsibilities into our NDC. That I think is the most important part, to establish the role, who is going to implement, how we're going to implement, if they have the resources to that implementation. And well, that's the work that Colombia has been developing, that will continue to develop it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolina. It is very encouraging to see that Colombia is already harnessing the air quality and the health benefits from abating pollutants. Well, thank you so much to our 3 country speakers. And before we go on to our next session, we would like to ask if any of the participants to the webinar would like to share their experience in incorporating short-lived climate forcers or tropospheric ozone, or any of their of its precursors into their country's NDCs. So to do so, please raise your hand, and then we will open the microphone for you. I'm gonna give some time to see if there is anyone in our participants who would like to share its experience. Okay, well, let us know anyway, and then we can share at the end as well. So for now on, to continue this webinar, Nina Jeffs is, we will hear from Nina Jeffs, who is a senior analyst in the Clean Air Fund's Super Pollutants portfolio, which is focused on raising the profile of black carbon in international climate and air quality agendas. Nina, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here and to present, especially after such amazing country presentations. I'm just going to share my screen, so please let me know if it's visible. Great, thanks very much. So I was asked to speak today to kind of take a step back from some of the specific country examples, to speak about how to integrate black carbon in NDCs, some success stories and lessons that we can learn from countries' leadership on integrating black carbon into NDCs for other short-lived climate pollutants. So for example, tropospheric ozone precursors. So I'll talk through why black carbon and air quality are relevant for NDCs and how these have been successfully integrated, as well as some key takeaways. But just to briefly introduce the Clean Air Fund for those who might not be familiar, Clean Air Fund is a philanthropic foundation with offices around the world that supports partners to create a future where everyone breathes clean air. We work on this topic with partners in a few different ways, from data to sort of public campaigning to policy engagement and finance. And we have, as Ziteli mentioned, we're working on programs on black carbon emissions, and also a program of work on tropospheric ozone. So briefly to touch on why integrating black carbon into NDCs is so beneficial and why countries have really taken leadership on this topic. I'll do my best not to repeat what the other speakers have already touched on as well. So as you can see, there's quite an overlap between air quality and climate change in terms of the sources and solutions and pollutants for these different issue areas. So as you can see here, this echoes a previous presentation. You can see that in combustion or other forms of pollution, different pollutants are produced that it can both be air pollutants causing human health impacts and climate pollutants contributing to climate change. And in the middle, you see both black carbon and tropospheric ozone, which are both short-lived climate pollutants and air pollutants with significant impacts on human health. And so that's why, well, one of the reasons that there's some sort of transferable lessons from integration of black carbon into national climate plans and tropospheric ozone precursors into climate plans, because integrated approaches to air quality management and climate change mitigation can kind of enable us to act on these pollutants together and tackle these challenges together. So as everyone's aware, I think on this call, climate super pollutants contribute to nearly half of global warming to date. And so there's also a really crucial imperative to integrate super pollutants into climate change strategies from an urgent climate change mitigation lens. Recent research shows that tackling super pollutants can mitigate climate change 4 times faster than just decarbonization. And as the other speakers have mentioned, there are important co-benefits like public health improvements and also some economic benefits of tackling air pollution, for example, by improving productivity and reducing healthcare costs. In terms of black carbon specifically, of course, we know that black carbon contributes to global warming, but it also has unique impacts on the local environment and regional environment because of its status as a black solid. So, for example, landing on snow and ice makes it melt faster. It also contributes to the urban heat island effect. And so acting on black carbon kind of urgently is important to address climate tipping points and bring local environmental benefits. For these reasons, because of its local impacts, it's also important for adaptation and resilience. So, for example, in countries that are sensitive to the monsoons, black carbon can increase the risk of extreme rainfall events such as floods. So tackling this can bring kind of local adaptation benefits as well as mitigation benefits. We also know that black carbon contributes to the millions of deaths each year due to air pollution. So there's a strong public health imperative there. And so integrating black carbon and I guess more broadly air quality measures into NDCs, of course, is critical for climate change mitigation, but it can also bring some of these local health and economic benefits I mentioned. And as the conversation about integrating health considerations into climate initiatives continues to grow, for example, with the COP28 Climate and Health Declaration, and increasing sort of awareness of the links between climate and health, integrating black carbon mitigation measures and air quality improvements can be a strong way to integrate health into NDCs. And with that in mind, we know that Governments are increasingly using NDCs as a way to integrate climate and development planning. And it's integrating measures with health and economic co-benefits into national climate plans as a way to actually raise attention to the need for finance for some of these measures, and to make it more likely to be able to implement some of these initiatives. So to touch on the how, I actually wasn't aware that Colombia would be presenting today, so I really don't want to, I hope to complement Carolina's presentation and not duplicate, and definitely welcome Carolina's reflections or inputs on what I'll be saying here. But Colombia is one of several countries demonstrating leadership on integrating black carbon into nationally determined contributions and on short-lived climate pollutants more broadly at a national level. And there are several reasons for this. I mean, having a really ambitious target to start off with, as Carolina mentioned, but also the really impressive range of specific mitigation measures for black carbon and other super pollutants, and black carbon and carbon dioxide, which have kind of detailed implementation information, like financing arrangements, some of the co-benefits, and the responsible institutions. So here I'm drawing on a really fantastic analysis, which I'll share in the chat after my presentation, by the Stockholm Environment Institute, which uses Colombia as an example and looks at the processes for NDC development for the last round of NDCs and kind of draws out lessons for other countries. So I'll share that in case it's of interest. But just to highlight a few elements of the process that were kind of recognized as potentially useful for other countries in integrating short-lived climate pollutants into their own plans. The first one is cross-government collaboration on the links between air quality and climate, and also a commitment to long-term joint planning on monitoring, on developing programs, on implementation. So as Carolina mentioned, you know, there was a national short-lived climate pollutant strategy for 4 years ahead of the last NDC, which I'm sure enabled some of these joint measures to be integrated in a really meaningful way. Having black carbon emissions inventory at a national level and monitoring capacity at a with national ownership also can really contribute to developing meaningful sectoral targets and implementation plans, and having wide public consultations on NDCs during the development process has been shown in multiple countries to contribute to more ambitious greenhouse gas and super pollutants reductions targets. And then finally, having a realistic package of implementation measures, which, as Carolina mentioned, has specific agencies or organizations attached to them as the ones responsible for implementing them, is really critical. Last year, we produced a policy brief on the benefits of integrating black carbon into enhanced NDCs, which kind of talks through some of these key points and also includes some sort of key principles on how best to integrate black carbon into NDCs. I can also share this in the chat. And I believe CCAC is presenting next their fantastic guidance, which is more detailed and would definitely recommend. Because black carbon is not a greenhouse gas, but is a short-lived climate pollutant, the approach to integrating black carbon into NDCs is a bit different. Black carbon isn't necessarily captured well in CO2 equivalent metrics because of some of its unique regional effects, for example. So the approach to integrating black carbon is different. So creating a standalone black carbon target that's additional to action on carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases works really well. Ideally, this would include all sources of emissions, including through an overarching target. It would be implementation oriented, including, if possible, approaches to finances and policies and actions to support an overarching target. And it would be ambitious, so that ideally aiming for the most technologically feasible reductions. As mentioned, cross-department collaboration is really critical to making this happen. So finally, just to wrap up, with a couple of key takeaways. Overall cross-government collaboration between air quality and climate portfolios in a longer term way is really beneficial for integrating short-lived climate pollutants into NDCs. But also what we learned from the Colombian example, it was that this process in itself, this ongoing collaboration, data gathering, and policy collaboration can actually contribute to more ambition on short-lived climate pollutants. So kind of a virtuous cycle. And here are a couple of ideas of what a gold standard approach might be to greenhouse gas targets, black carbon, and sort of sectoral measures. So I'll share those links in the chat, and thank you very much for listening, and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Nina, for this great summary of Cleaner Fund's efforts on short-lived climate pollutants. We will now pass the floor to Dr. Nathan Borgford Parnell, who is the Scientific Affairs Lead at the Climate and Cleaner Coalition. Please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zidley. And I apologize, I'm having, thank you, internet issues, so I'd prefer that you share the slides on my behalf. Hello, everyone, and it's fantastic to see so many old friends on the line thus far. I am honored to have been invited to talk about this important issue. Next slide, please. Whenever I talk about metrics and SLCPs or SLCFs, I always like to start off on the lighter side of things. Not to be too flippant on the issue, but this gets to the absolute foundation for the justification for why we have a climate and clean air coalition. The recognition that methane is not carbon dioxide. Short-lived climate pollutants, short-lived climate forcers are not carbon dioxide. CO2 is very long-lived. It's globally well mixed. Methane is short-lived, but globally well mixed. CO2 accumulates in the atmosphere, which means it's a little more like nuclear waste. And methane and SLCPs or SLCFs are very short-lived, which means that they flow through the atmosphere relatively quickly. Both of them have to be addressed for different issues. They interact with the environment and the climate in very different ways. Methane contributes to the formation of tropospheric ozone, which of course is one of the main issues on the table here today, which damages plants, and CO2 is a fundamental component of photosynthesis, the necessary building blocks to sustain life in the biosphere. So inherently, they are not equivalent. And then you get even more complicated when we get down to SLCFs. The benefit of methane, of course, is that it is globally well mixed, so at least it has that relationship with CO2. And one of the reasons why it's fundamental to climate planning and mitigation, and has been recognized as a climate forcer since the very beginning. When it comes to SLCPs or the broader category of shorter-lived pollutants that are short-lived climate forcers, most of them are not globally well mixed. They're local or regional air pollutants. Many of them are not even gases. Many of them are particles. All of them interact with the climate systems in ways that are truly and fundamentally different than globally well mixed gases. And those differences are at the crux of what we explore in the CCAC, and what was described by my previous, particularly the country presenters. The nuance on those differences, those impacts are where all of the interest is in countries. The links to sustainable development, the links to air quality and public health and infrastructure impacts, all happen in the differences between these pollutants, not in their similarities. And so, yeah, I'd like to start there with my presentation. I'll do a couple of more background slides, and then I'll get to the discussion of metrics. So next slide, please. So what does this mean in practice? This graphic, one of my favorites, but it's getting a little old. It's getting a little dated. This is a graphic from the 2018 special report by the IPCC on 1.5 pathways. And again, it's important to recognize, in particular, as it comes to the lifetime of these pollutants and the differences between them, they all contribute to climate change. If we want to meet our climate temperature commitments, we need to be reducing all of these pollutants, not some of these pollutants, not trading pollutants between each other. As you see in this graphic, for a 1.5 consistent pathway, CO2 needs to be on a trajectory to net zero, if not net negative, by within the 2060s and 2070 time period, whereas methane only needs to be reduced by about half to 60%. And then maintained at a stable level to achieve a 1.5 consistent pathway. Black carbon similarly would have to come down by about 90% by the end of this century, certainly not to net zero. Nitrous oxide as well, somewhat less down. If all of these pollutants are not, or climate forcing pollutants are not going down at levels and rates that are consistent with 1.5 or 2C or whatever other temperature target we have established, then we will not meet those commitments. And that is always a risk when we talk about injecting additional content or into the UNFCCC process and with the NDCs, because they historically have worked using carbon dioxide equivalencies, which do inherently allow for the fungibility between these pollutants, which has led to a trading between these pollutants, meaning theoretically some could go up at the to allow others to go down, or be held stable to allow others to go down. And simply, if you're going to meet these climate commitments, we cannot trade between these pollutants. They all have to be coming down, or we are talking about failing at the greatest challenge that we as a species have before us at this moment. Next slide, please. So just one more very quickly. This is a very detailed slide. I've stolen it from colleagues in the SAP and our other partner institutions, and I just want to put it up very quickly to show you another illustrative example of how these things are not the same, and some of the risks inherent when we're talking about NDCs and climate metrics if we do not understand the differences between these pollutants. And in particular, if we use carbon dioxide equivalent metrics to combine these pollutants, some of the risks that come from doing that. So just very quickly, the gray area there in that table represents the projected temperature change from a particular carbon budget. So a total reduction in carbon dioxide equivalents, assuming that reduction in carbon dioxide equivalents is achieved exclusively by reducing CO2. So if the entire carbon dioxide equivalent reduction is achieved only by reducing CO2, you achieve a certain amount of avoided warming off of the baseline. That's that top gray line there. And one of the reasons why that is, it does not have as much of a reduction as the other lines is, as I indicated before, carbon dioxide is very long-lived in the atmosphere. You have to reduce it now to see reductions or changes in concentrations a few decades into the future. So there is a very slow accumulation of avoided warming or reduced warming when you target CO2. The next line, that blue shaded area, is representative of what would happen if that same CO2 equivalent budget was filled with a comprehensive and mixed set of mitigations covering all Kyoto basket greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide. So PFCs, SF6, methane, all of the F gases, nitrous oxide. You see you achieve substantially more avoided warming by including those other pollutants, while you are still reducing the same amount of CO2e. And that, again, is because of the differences between those pollutants. Some of them work faster, particularly methane. And so finally, if you turn to the green bar there, if you take the same carbon dioxide equivalent tonnage total reduction and you maximize the potential gettable methane mitigation within that total, you achieve the green bar, avoided warming, which is a scenario wherein, at least in this case, in the scenarios that they were using, you find yourself by the end of the century back down below 1.5. I think this is instructive because it's not easy to truly understand the implications of carbon dioxide equivalencies in practice. And this is, I think, one of the better examples of the implications of that. You really lose a lot when you start adding things into carbon dioxide equivalencies. And in this case, you lose the game when it comes to our climate commitments, depending on how those carbon budgets are interpreted. Next slide. So you may imagine the CCAC has been grappling with appropriate metrics for comparison and between short-lived climate forcers or short-lived climate pollutants and long-lived well-mixed greenhouse gases since our founding. We've done a number of analyses over the years. I don't expect anybody to read this table. I'm hoping these slides will be shared after these presentations, but this is a pull from an analysis that we did in the scientific advisory panel and with a large swath of international experts. I think Abraham actually was there with us, if I recall, in Ottawa in 2018, looking at all the different metrics that we could come up with to identify one's alternatives to 100-year GWP CO2 equivalencies that better represent short-lived climate pollutants, that could better combine them. So we looked at a number of factors: climate stabilization, climate rate of change, health, and agriculture and vegetation metrics. I'm not going to go into any of those, but just to summarize very quickly, what we found was, at the end of the day, and this is something the IPCC has said in every assessment report they've ever written, the metric that you choose to compare these pollutants depends entirely on the policy objectives that you have. It is impossible to say unobjectively that CO2e or GWP 100 is the correct metric to use to compare even the Kyoto basket of greenhouse gases. You need to know what the policy objective is first. The metric is chosen based on that policy objective. So in our case, in the CCAC, we're trying to maximize near-term avoided warming and coincident benefits for air quality and sustainable development. And what we found was, even then, we did not find a single metric that worked, where we had a consensus. But if we understood the tons of all of the pollutants, all of the relevant pollutants, how they change based on the different measures that were implemented, different commitments that were implemented, if we understood how those tons changed, then it wouldn't matter what metric we chose. We could use the tonnage to translate into any metric that was relevant for any policy objective. That having been said as well, temperature change is the one metric that we could all agree on. Temperature change over time. So tons and temperature were the metrics that we settled on when it came to climate, because it allows for the greatest amount of flexibility. Now, turning quickly, I know I'm going a little over my own time here. I'll try to speed up in the last set of slides, but getting specifically to the topics at hand, when it comes to black carbon, I think that's already been covered really well by the presentations from the countries and my the previous presenter. As I mentioned before, black carbon, it's not a gas, it's an aerosol, it's a local and regional air pollutant. We have concluded, and it's been the position of the scientific advisory panel in the SAP in the CCAC, that you should never convert aerosols in particular, but for the most part, any short-lived non-well-mixed greenhouse gas into carbon dioxide equivalencies. it's inappropriate for a great number of reasons, and that is why Mexico and Colombia, Nigeria and Kenya, Canada, and a great number of other countries don't include it in their economy-wide targets, in their NDCs, and their mid-century plans. They include a separate reduction target, which was explained well in the previous presentations. When you get down to ozone, it's a whole nother level of complexity. It's worth pointing out in the CCAC, tropospheric ozone is one of the original short-lived climate pollutants. So we've been working on tropospheric ozone since our founding, but we do it primarily by reducing methane, the one globally well-mixed precursor. Methane is the sledgehammer that gets at ozone in the most efficient way that makes the most sense to the climate community, and we've hopefully been quite effective at pushing that narrative and advocating and generating action on methane, in part because of that nexus with ozone. Once you get past methane to the other precursors, it becomes a whole nother ecosystem of complexity at scales that even we didn't grapple with in 2018 when we were talking about these metrics. Carbon monoxide, NOx, and non-methane volatile organic compounds are not globally well mixed. They are regional and local air pollutants. It is not a simple thing to know how a change in any one of those pollutants will result in a change in ozone, because you need to know where they are emitted, you need to know where they are going, you need to have information about the geological situation and atmospheric conditions in cities and neighboring environments. It becomes a substantially different thing to start focusing on the non-methane precursors of ozone, particularly in the climate context, and expect that you will achieve the changes in ozone concentrations that you're hoping for. Methane, as I said, it's a brute force instrument. You reduce methane in Montevideo, you're going to get a change in ozone formation in Montenegro. Because it's globally well mixed. That is not the same for any of the other pollutants. And so, next slide. So I want to recall a couple of things that were said by Abraham and by Faith, actually. A couple of things that they mentioned. I'm not going to read these slides. You guys can read these slides, the text in this slide yourselves. But so Abraham and Faith, they were mentioning a focus on measures. And Abraham in particular was mentioning the need for coordination between climate and air quality management communities. And those things I think we should really take to heart. These, particularly the VOCs, the carbon monoxide and the NOx, they are co-emitted with a great number of other pollutants. They come from sources that are already being targeted in the NDCs right now. NOx is being emitted in the transport sector and the industrial sector. Any measures, electrification in the transport sector is inherently going to reduce NOx, right? It's inherently going to, any efficiency programs in industrial sector for the benefit of reducing CO2 are also going to get at NOx. Carbon monoxide is emitted through largely low temperature combustion. Any activities related to combustion of fossil fuels that aren't at utility scale are also going to get at carbon monoxide. So, I said you need to know where these pollutants are coming from to understand how they change ozone. If you focus on the co-pollutants, or if you look at all of the co-pollutants, you'll and you see where the sources are. One, you'll see in the NDCs right now, many NDCs, even though maybe they're not recognizing it, are already going to be reducing substantial amounts of NOx, VOCs, and carbon monoxide by virtue of the fact that they're targeting the sources where because of a focus on CO2 or methane in the energy sector. You're going to get a lot from those places, even without explicitly bringing VOCs into the NDCs. Now, and the last thing I'll say on this, actually on that point that Abraham raised around climate change and air pollution, it's also critically important to remember that there are communities out there that have been working on the non-methane precursors to ozone for, in many parts of the world, for half a century. That's the air quality management community. And they have incredible expertise and have been grappling with these complexities for a long time. So full harmonization and collaboration between those communities is absolutely critical if we are going to realistically address ozone and get it down further by targeting the non-methane precursors. So was there a hand raised? Do you want me, am I
Yeah,
over?
no, just thank you. I wanted to thank you just for giving the other speakers time. And we still have some takeaways and Q&A. So yeah.
Jump to the end of my presentation here. I mean, I pulled Cote d'Ivoire and Colombia as examples of good examples of how they're handling the addition of SLCPs. But if you could just jump to the end of my slide deck, I'll just say, or 2 slides forward. Sorry. One more. So I just want to wrap this all up. I've hit VOCs a little hard, and I apologize to VOCs for it, although I know that they probably don't care. We have guidance. We've been developing guidance with and applying it with, in fact, all 3 countries that have presented here today, and a great many countries over the last since 2014 when the INDCs started coming out, to help countries figure out how to add SLCPs responsibly to their NDCs to build and connect to sustainable development goals and to build ambition that's consistent with our climate objectives. And the first thing that in our guidance, and we've got a QR code here for our full set of guidance, is you need to build up from a comprehensive understanding of your greenhouse gas and criteria air pollutant emissions. You need to build up from a comprehensive inventory and identify the measures that you want to take or you can take, the co-pollutants and the net impact of the change in all of those measures. And if you can add up from the bottom up to your economy-wide target, which I know has to be communicated in CO2e, then you can, and it's in our guidance here, you can then report in the text of your NDC and your BTR back down what the implications of that CO2e economy-wide target are for every sector in your economy, every subsector, and every individual action that you want to take. And inherent in that, you would be able to then transmit either through your BTR or in the text of your NDC what the expected change in all of those pollutants would be, including VOCs, NOx, CO, and the rest. And that is how we recommend is the most responsible way to add the non-methane precursors to the NDCs.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nathan. We greatly appreciate this clarification. This was like a masterclass, I would say, on what are the differences between the short-lived climate pollutants. It's very important to understand and how relevant it is to separate them using a metric that allows us to provide a full picture of the benefits by reducing them. So thank you so much. Our last presentation will be led by Dr. Rodolfo Lassi. He's a senior advisor for the Cleaner Institute. Formerly, he was the environment director at the OECD and served as deputy minister of the environment in Mexico. Dr. Lassi was head of the Mexican delegation in climate change negotiations during the Paris Agreement and coordinated Mexico's first intended NDCs and the Mexican climate strategy for 2050. Throughout his entire career, Dr. Lassi has been one of the most important environmental voices in Latin America and in Mexico, and we are very glad to hear from you today. The floor is yours. I think you're muted, Rodolfo.
Oh, sorry. So thank you very much, Citeli, for your kind introduction. It is truly an honor to be here today among such distinguished colleagues and partners to present a first roadmap to integrate short-lived climate pollutants in the NDC. So let's begin with the next slide, and we will go faster because we don't have too much time. So we have to remember that from the beginning, and more clearly since 2013, the IPCC has incorporated gases and particles in its analysis of climate forces. However, the scientific foundations of the convention have yet to be updated accordingly. As a result, the Paris Agreement remains outdated, as it only considers 6 compounds of group of compounds, failing to reflect the latest advancement that climate science is doing. So Nathan did a splendid presentation about it. So the figure in this slide, taken from the IPCC 6th assessment report, highlights the significant role of tropospheric ozone in this context. So in the next slide, and following the establishment of the CCAC in 2012, many affiliated countries initiated actions, including financial commitments and strategic planning, to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, particularly methane and black carbon. However, this effort largely remained at the technical level and lacked a high-level political momentum. So there were notable exceptions, such as the presidents of Mexico and the United States. And Mexico has previously mentioned, Abraham did it, became the first country to incorporate a quantitative target for black carbon reduction in its NDC, while both leaders, the US and the Mexican leaders, presidents, publicly recognized the urgency of addressing short-lived climate pollutants on the global agenda. In the next slide, you can read the decision made at COP28 in Dubai. A pivotal decision was finally made to address pollutants beyond carbon dioxide and its equivalents under the convention's metric. In the next slide, there's a summary of this policy brief that in our alliance, Citeli made a very effective coordination of this report. You will find in this report 4 hints about what those successful mitigation efforts to control short-lived climate pollutants relied on. So a strong political commitment. It is very important, the coordination and cooperation between multiple actors, the scientific information, and of course, a regional and local approaches. And I want to add the sectorial dimension that is also quite relevant. So in the next slide, I am summarizing the call that this alliance to take action on tropospheric ozone made, a call that we are still making, a call to consider tropospheric ozone and other climate superpollutants to be mandated within the UNFCCC processes, a call for parties to join and deliver results on this. And let me jump to the financing side, because the COP29 was mainly related with the new collective quantified goal, the trillions that we are still expecting. And we expressed that efforts to reduce tropospheric ozone and its precursors should be supported by donor countries, multilateral development banks, and philanthropic foundations through grants and concessional development financing, so that recipient countries do not suffer debt distress. That is the main problem. Faith explained it very well in her presentation today, early in the morning. So in the next slide, let me summarize also what the World Resources Institute is proposing, a 5-point plan, but it is widely recognized that the ambition to current NDCs is inadequate, steering the world toward a temperature rise of 2.5 degrees Celsius, or possibly even 3 degrees Celsius. So to remain below the 1.5 degrees threshold, focusing solely in the 6 compounds covered by the Paris Agreement would necessitate a minimum 43% reduction in greenhouse emissions by 2030 and 60% reduction by 2035. So that is very, very difficult. So from this plan, let me only highlight the urgent need to accelerate sectorial transformations, which can be achieved more swiftly by reducing short-lived climate pollutants. And with existing regulations and a solid technological foundation already in place, these efforts can be scaled up effectively. So in the next slide, I am putting just one example of this sectorial approach. Clara is a diverse network of groups working on agriculture, forestry, conservation, and restoration. And the preparation of an NDC is a complex process. No, our colleagues from Colombia, Carolina, I think that, well, she made a splendid presentation. And Clara here is depicting in this slide what is this complex process. So the most effective approach, as also recommended by the WRI, is to place people's need in the center of the process. By doing so, mitigation efforts should first focus on reducing the climate pollutants that pose the greatest risks to public health. Specifically, of course, black carbon and ozone, along with their precursors, of which are highly toxic. Therefore, the outcomes would be measured not in tons of CO2 equivalent, but in lives saved, healthcare costs reduced, or crop losses prevented. So in the final slide I have, and taking all these principles and recommendations, guidelines, let me present a possible roadmap to prepare NDCs, including short-lived climate pollutants. The first crucial step in an NDC, ensuring that the most urgent need of the population are at its core, is to secure a political commitment from the government to integrate short-lived climate pollutants. The second key consideration, recognizing that this is a nationally determined decision, is the commitment to adopting a metric aligned with air quality programs, measuring emissions in tons of each pollutant rather than in CO2 equivalents, as Nathan also explained, because it is not feasible, of course, to have an homogeneous metric. So developing a comprehensive emission inventory is crucial also, incorporating gases and particles such as black carbon, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxides, particulate matter, of course, and volatile organic compounds, the latter serving as ozone precursor. So next, a comprehensive sectorial and national planning process must be implemented, seamlessly integrating the development of NDCs and the long-term strategy in alignment with the UNFCCC guidelines. A robust financial framework supported by economic instruments to assign value to carbon emissions and short-lived climate pollutants should be a top priority. Additionally, a monitoring, reporting, and verification mechanism must incorporate the specific metrics used to formulate short-lived climate reduction pollutant reduction commitments, ensuring transparency and accountability that is quite relevant. In my next slide, I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lassi. You really gave us lots of food for thought. And now our last intervention will be led by Stephanie Montero, who is an environmental health specialist at the Clean Air Institute, and who will guide our final Q&A and discussion section. Lastly, Stephanie will provide closing remarks for today's webinar. Thank you, Stephanie, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Citeli, and thank you to all our speakers for those insightful presentations. We've heard compelling arguments for integrating short-lived climate pollutants into NDCs, as well as real-world examples of how this can be done. Due to time constraints, we will not be able to cover any questions, but we are open to receive your questions via email today. You can find the email address in the chat, info@cleanairinstitute.org, and we will direct the questions to our panelists and make sure to share the responses with everyone as soon as possible. So to wrap up the session, I want to highlight a few key takeaways from today's discussion. The first one, well, short-lived climate pollutants are a critical missing piece in NDCs. Increasing the ambition by addressing and integrating these pollutants in NDCs can significantly accelerate climate mitigation, improve air quality, and protect public health. Countries like Colombia, Kenya, and Mexico are leading by example. Their experiences provide valuable lessons for others looking to integrate short-lived climate pollutants into their policies. And finally, standardized methodologies and robust MRV systems are essential for tracking progress and ensuring accountability. So we encourage all participants to explore the resources shared in the chat by our colleagues and continue this conversation beyond today's session. A big thank you to our speakers, organizers, and all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing many of you continue this important work as we head toward COP30. One final reminder, next Thursday at the same time, we are hosting a webinar on mitigation strategies to reduce local ozone impacts on climate, so don't miss it. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.